Why the hell did we drop 0.3 of a percentage point in quarterly active users on Lumina Core? Nate, I'm looking at you. Explain it. Gavin Vance's voice didn't just ring through the conference room. It cut through the Monday morning fog like an ice pick. He was sitting at the head of the glass table, his custom-tailored charcoal suit perfectly pressed, leaning forward with his elbows planted. He looked less like a tech executive and more like a prosecutor trying to secure a death penalty. I kept my fingers wrapped around my Pilot G2 pen, squeezing it just tight enough to keep my knuckles from turning white. I looked at the slide projected on the wall, then back at Gavin. The metric fluctuation is well within the standard variance. Gavin, I said, keeping my tone flat, professional, and completely devoid of the irritation bubbling under my collar. Last month, we coordinated with marketing for a massive user acquisition channel purge. We systematically scrubbed the database of ghost accounts, bot signups, and dormant profiles. The drop isn't a loss of real engagement. It's a cleanup. So your defense for a failing KPI is that you did it on purpose? Gavin slammed his palm onto the mahogany-trimmed table. The sound was like a gunshot in the enclosed room. The printout of the quarterly report rattled against the glass. I don't give a shit about your process, Nate. I care about the numbers that go to the board. The numbers say down. The core revenue engine of Apex Technologies is sitting in your lap, and this is what you bring me? The silence in the room became absolute. Nobody breathed. To my left, Zach Miller, our youngest developer, suddenly found his cuticles fascinating. Across the table, a couple of project managers from the product side shifted in their ergonomic chairs, their eyes darting between Gavin and me with a mix of cheap sympathy and profound relief that they weren't in the crosshairs. I took a slow, deep breath, letting the oxygen steady my pulse, and looked Gavin straight in the eye. If you look at the secondary metrics on page 4, Gavin, you'll see that high-value user retention and paid conversion rates are both up by 5.2%, I stated, pointing a finger at the screen. That was the entire objective of the purge. We cut the fat, so we stopped burning server capital on dead leads. It's called building a healthy infrastructure. That's how you keep Lumina Core sustainable for the next 5 years. Oh, I see. Gavin leaned back, a patronizing, razor-thin smile creeping onto his face. He locked his fingers together over his stomach. You're teaching me how to run a business now? Is that what this is, Nathaniel? You think because you wrote the initial lines of code for Lumina Core 5 years ago, you have a permanent pass to lecture executive management? No, I replied calmly. I'm just stating the engineering reality. The reality is that I am the vice president of technology, and what I see is a downward trend line under your watch, Gavin said, his voice dropping to a dangerous, low hiss. He stood up, towering over the table, gripping the edge with both hands as he leaned in. I don't care how pretty you make your slides look. A beautiful report doesn't hide incompetence. You've got a blind spot the size of a tractor trailer, Nate, and your ego is driving. I didn't blink. The data supports the strategy. I don't want strategies. I want the damn line going up, Gavin snapped. He pointed a finger directly at my face. By Friday afternoon, I want this issue resolved. I want those 0.3 back, and I don't care if you have to spoof the API traffic to do it. If the dashboard looks this ugly next Monday morning, you're going to find out exactly how replaceable a senior software architect really is in this market. He didn't wait for a reply. He grabbed his tablet, shoved his chair back with a harsh screech, and marched out of the room. The heavy oak door slammed shut behind him, leaving the air tasting like ozone and collective panic. For 3 seconds, nobody said a word. Then, the project managers practically scrambled over each other to log out of the Zoom link and clear their laptops from the table. Within 30 seconds, it was just me, Brooks Montgomery, and Zach left in the room. Man, screw that guy, Zach muttered, finally looking up. He slammed his laptop shut. Spoof the API traffic? Is he insane? That's straight-up fraud. If we inflate the active sessions artificially, the Stardust data feed will flag us for a breach of contract within 12 hours. Keep your voice down, Zach, Brooks said, his voice seasoned with a decade of corporate cynicism. He stood up and walked over to the whiteboard, grabbing an eraser to clear the scribbled diagrams from earlier. Gavin doesn't know what an API is. He thinks the internet runs on magic and vanity metrics. He knows exactly what he's doing, I said, tossing my pen onto the table. I rubbed the bridge of my nose, feeling a migraine starting to bloom right behind my eyes. He's setting a fire so he can blame me for the smoke. It's about the core maintenance seat, isn't it? Brooks asked, turning around, the eraser dangling from his hand. He was the senior-most engineer on my team, the guy who had been in the trenches with me since the days we were running Apex out of a rented warehouse in Austin. Last week, he tried to force his nephew, or whatever that kid was fresh out of an online boot camp, into our core repository group. You blocked the pull request and told Gavin the kid couldn't even format a basic JSON file. He had no security clearance, Brooks. He was committing code with hard-coded credentials, I said, standing up and grabbing my laptop. I'm not letting an amateur compromise a database that handles 40 million user profiles just to make Gavin look good at Thanksgiving dinner. Well, now he's making it personal, Brooks said, walking beside me as we exited the conference room and headed down the bright, open-plan corridor of the tech floor. The micromanagement is getting out of hand. The team is spending more time filling out Jira tickets about why they're filling out Jira tickets than actually writing code. We just have to hold the line until Julian gets back from the European Tech Summit, I murmured, keeping my eyes forward as we passed row after row of monitors. Julian understands the tech. He knows what Lumina Core means to this company. Julian is the CEO, Nate, but he's only half the equation, Brooks said, dropping his voice as we approached my corner office. Victoria is the one holding the checkbook. She's the one who brought Gavin in from Oracle. She paid a 3 times market premium to poach him because she wanted a disruptor to streamline the engineering department. If it comes down to a knife fight between you and the guy she handpicked to maximize shareholder value, who do you think she's backing? I stopped at my door and looked at Brooks. He was right, and it sickened me. Julian Sterling was a brilliant, tech-first idealist, but his wife, Victoria Sterling, was the true gravity wells of Apex Technologies. She didn't look at code. She looked at margins. To her, developers were just expensive machines that turned coffee into equity. Just get the team focused on the Stardust integration patch, I told him, pushing my door open. Don't let them lose focus. If our data pipeline breaks, Gavin won't even need a reason to fire us. The system will do it for him. Copy that, boss, Brooks sighed. But keep your head on a swivel. That shark in the corner office is smelling blood. I closed my office door, shutting out the hum of the server fans and the clatter of mechanical keyboards. I dropped my laptop onto the desk and stared out the window at the Austin skyline. The sun was burning hot against the glass, casting long, sharp shadows across the floor. 5 years. I had spent 5 years building Lumina Core from a whiteboard sketch into an enterprise software asset valued at 9 figures. I knew every bug, every edge case, every optimization logic in that codebase. It was my architecture, my design. And now, a suit who couldn't compile a Hello World program was trying to use it as a ladder to the C-suite, even if he had to break my neck to step on it. I opened my laptop, pulled up the master terminal, and watched the live traffic log stream across the screen. The data was clean. The system was fast. It was a masterpiece of engineering efficiency, and I was going to damn well protect it. My desk phone buzzed. The caller ID showed the executive suite extension. Nathaniel, Gavin's assistant's voice came through the speaker, crisp and entirely robotic. Gavin has rescheduled your weekly architecture review. It's now at 3 o'clock today, and he's requested you bring the unredacted third-party vendor logs for Stardust data. I felt my jaw tighten. The unredacted logs contain the proprietary cryptographic handshake protocols. Tell him I'll be there, I said, and hung up before she could reply. The game was moving faster than I thought. I reached into my collar, pulling out a thin silver chain hidden beneath my shirt. Dangling from it was a heavy, military-grade encrypted flash drive. It contained the master developer key, the only physical bypass to the entire Lumina infrastructure. Gavin wanted the logs. He wanted the access. But he didn't realize that some doors are locked for a reason, and I was the only one who knew what was waiting on the other side. The third-floor conference room smelled like stale corporate coffee and unearned authority. Gavin Vance didn't look up when I walked in. He was tapping at his iPad, his fingers making sharp, aggressive clicking sounds on the screen. I sat down 2 seats away from him and dropped a thick, bound folder onto the glass table. The unredacted Stardust data logs you requested. Every query handshake from the last 90 days. Gavin slowly slid his eyes toward the folder, then back to his screen. He let the silence hang for a solid 10 seconds, A classic management seminar power play, before he finally locked his iPad and leaned forward. I didn't just ask for logs, Nate. I asked for compliance, Gavin said, his voice smooth, calculated, and dripping with condescension. I spent the last 2 hours reviewing your team's output metrics. Do you want to explain to me why your senior engineer, Brooks Montgomery, spent 4 hours on Thursday doing refactoring code instead of closing out the front-end pipeline tickets? Because the legacy pipeline was throwing memory leaks that would have crashed the mobile build during the next OS update, I said, my voice completely flat. Brooks is fixing a foundational leak. That's what senior engineers do. They prevent disasters before they hit production. What they do is what I tell them to do, Gavin snapped, his corporate veneer cracking just enough to show the tyrant underneath. I am optimizing resource allocation across this entire division. Starting tomorrow, your team is dropping from 8 developers to 6. I'm reassigning Miller and Chun to the legacy e-commerce support team. I felt my chest tighten. You're pulling my 2 fastest backend engineers to put them on a dead-end maintenance project? Lumina Core handles 40 million active user sessions, Gavin. We are already running on a skeleton crew. Then you'll have to run leaner, won't you? Gavin smiled, a cruel, tight little grin. And to make sure those remaining 6 are actually earning their equity, I'm implementing a new project tracking protocol. Thrice daily progress reports. Loaded into Jira by 9 a.m., 1 p.m., and 5 p.m., detailed down to the hour. Every line of code needs a corresponding ticket and a timestamp. That's not management, Gavin. That's a chokehold, I said, leaning over the table, keeping my voice low and lethal. You're asking programmers to spend 30% of their day writing essays about why they're writing code. It ruins velocity. It kills morale. It creates accountability. Gavin shot back, his eyes drilling into mine. And frankly, Nate, given your recent metric dip, accountability is a luxury you desperately need. He reached into his leather briefcase, pulled out a fresh, blue-bound document, and tossed it across the glass. It slid right over my folder, stopping inches from my hands. The cover read, Stardust Data, Vendor Renewal Agreement, amended. This came in from Stardust's legal team this morning, Gavin said, tapping the blue cover. Look at Section 9, the Safety and Verification Protocols. I opened the document, flipping straight to the section. It took me less than 10 seconds to realize what I was looking at. My stomach dropped like a lead weight. You gutted the dynamic handshake, I said, staring at the pages in disbelief. You replaced our proprietary, multi-layered security verification with a generic, off-the-shelf standard template. Gavin, this is a joke. This template hasn't been updated since 2022. It lowers our annual data licensing fees by 15%, Gavin said smoothly, leaning back and crossing his legs. That is an immediate, bottom-line savings of $3 million. $3 million, Nate. Do you know what that does for our quarterly EBITDA? It leaves us wide open to a brute force injection attack, I barked, slamming the document shut. Stardust is our primary data supplier. Our entire algorithmic engine feeds off their live streams. If their data source is compromised, or if someone sniffs our connection because we're using a garbage security protocol, Lumina Core doesn't just stutter. It goes completely dark. The risk is catastrophic. Risk, 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 Gavin mocked, waving his hand as if swatting away a fly. That is the default defense mechanism of every outdated engineer who wants to justify their bloated salary. Oh, the sky is falling. Don't touch my code. Stardust assured me their baseline servers are secure. The $3 million is real. Your hypothetical boogeyman isn't. The security architecture isn't a suggestion, Gavin. It's the damn baseline of the entire product. I stood up, my chair scraping violently against the floor. I built this protocol with my own hands. I know the vulnerabilities. If you sign this contract, you are putting a target on the back of every user profile we own. Gavin didn't stand up. He just sat there, looking up at me with cold, triumphant eyes, completely unbothered by my anger. In fact, he looked like he had been waiting for exactly this reaction. You think you're irreplaceable, don't you, Nate? Gavin said, his voice dropping into a menacing whisper. You think because your name is on the original patents, you get to hold this executive suite hostage over your technical stubbornness. Let me clear something up for you. Apex Technologies' Leela Suri Do Jiaoyang John runs just fine without anyone. The world keeps turning. This isn't about my ego. It's about data integrity. I don't give a damn what it's about. Gavin stood up slowly, smoothing the front of his jacket, his eyes locking onto mine like a predator cornering its prey. I've already cleared this with corporate legal. The contract is finalized. I am signing it on Friday morning. Now, you have a choice to make, Nathaniel. He stepped closer, the scent of his expensive cologne filling the gap between us. Option A. You get your team in line, you enforce the new reporting schedule, and you implement the Stardust template changes by Friday afternoon without another word of complaint. Option B. You decide your technical principles are worth more than your stock options, and you walk out that door for good. Either way, that contract is getting signed. So, tell me, are you a team player, or are you just history? The provocation was naked. It was a brutal, deliberate execution of corporate leverage, designed to break my spirit or force my exit. I looked at the contract on the table, then at Gavin's smug, expectant face. My blood was roaring in my ears, but I didn't say a word. I picked up my laptop, turned around, and walked out of the room, leaving the blue-bound trap sitting on the glass table behind me. The air in the fire stairwell was hot and smelled of industrial paint. I stood on the concrete landing between the fourth and fifth floors, my fingers trembling slightly as I stared at the phone screen. Through the heavy metal door behind me, I could hear the muffled, frantic clicking of mechanical keyboards, the sound of my team burning their working hours on Gavin's useless, thrice-daily micromanagement logs. I sucked in a breath of dry air, pulled up the contact, and tapped dial. The phone rang. Once, twice, 3 times, 4. I was just about to pull it away from my ear, assuming it was a lost cause, when the line clicked open. Yes, Victoria Sterling's voice was like ice cracking over a winter lake. It was a single word, but it carried the weight of a woman who controlled a billion-dollar balance sheet and had zero time for standard pleasantries. Victoria, it's Nathaniel Cole, Senior Software Architect for Lumina Core, I said, forcing my voice into a steady, authoritative register. I know this is bypassing standard protocol, but we have a critical infrastructure emergency that couldn't wait for Julian's return. There was a brief, agonizing pause on the other end. I could hear the faint rustle of high-grade paper on her end. She was multitasking, and I was an uninvited distraction. Nathaniel, she said, her tone analytical, flat, and entirely unbothered. I know exactly who you are. I also know that you have a chain of command. Why isn't this conversation happening through Gavin? Because Gavin is the emergency. Victoria, I said, leaning my back against the concrete wall. He's forcing a contract amendment with Stardust Data to save $3 million on licensing. To hit that number, he's completely gutting the dynamic security authentication protocol I built 5 years ago. He's replacing it with a generic, outdated baseline template. I am aware of the Stardust contract, Nathaniel, Victoria said, her voice dropping into an even colder tier of indifference. In fact, I signed off on the cost reduction target myself. Then you need to know the true cost. I pushed back, refusing to let her freeze me out. The generic template eliminates the randomized cryptographic handshake. If Stardust data servers get hit, or if a bad actor sniffs our API stream, our entire backend database goes fully exposed. Lumina Core will suffer an instantaneous, total system failure. The $3 million you save on paper will be swallowed by 10 times that amount in vendor lawsuits and user churn within 48 hours. The silence stretched over the cellular link. For a second, I thought the call had dropped. I waited, my heart hammering against my ribs, hoping the raw financial risk would trigger her pragmatic corporate instincts. When she finally spoke, her voice wasn't just cold, it was razor-sharp and dangerous. Are you done, Nathaniel? Victoria, I'm trying to protect the core asset of this company. Listen to me very carefully, she interrupted, cutting through my words like a buzzsaw. I paid a 3 times market premium to pull Gavin Vance away from our biggest competitor. I hired him because this engineering department has operated like an expensive, undisciplined sandbox for too long. His job is to optimize our margins. If he says the baseline security is sufficient, then it is sufficient. He doesn't know the difference between a database and a spreadsheet. Victoria, he's playing Russian roulette with our code. Enough? She snapped, and I could hear the definitive click of a pen closing on her desk. I do not pay line-level employees to dictate executive strategy or challenge my leadership hires. If you have a personal grievance with your vice president's management style, HR has a portal for that. If you cannot execute his directives, you are more than welcome to exit the building. I have a board meeting in 2 minutes. Do not call this number again. The line went dead. The busy tone buzzed in my ear, loud and mocking in the empty stairwell. I stood frozen on the concrete landing, the cold phone pressed against my cheek. The illusion was entirely shattered. 5 years of late nights, 80-hour work weeks, and missed holidays. All of it meant absolutely nothing to the people at the top. To Victoria, Lumina Core wasn't a masterpiece of engineering or a vital service for 40 million people. It was just an arbitrary column on a spreadsheet, and I was just an expensive cog that was getting too noisy to keep. I slowly lowered the phone. The desperation in my chest suddenly evaporated, replaced by a cold, crystalline calm. You want to see what a line-level employee can do? I thought, my jaw tightening. Fine. Let's see how long your empire stands without the foundation. I pushed open the heavy stairwell door and walked back onto the tech floor. I didn't look at Gavin's glass-walled corner office. I walked straight to my desk, sat down, and pulled up a clean document terminal. My fingers moved across the keyboard with a steady, deliberate rhythm. To HR/Executive Management. From Nathaniel Cole, Senior Software Architect. Effective immediately. I am resigning from my position at Apex Technologies. All relevant system documentation has been compiled and uploaded to the shared archive under ArchiveNet. I didn't write an essay. I didn't complain about Gavin. I didn't plead my case. I kept it brief, professional, and entirely lethal. Because what Gavin and Victoria didn't understand, what their expensive MBAs and corporate strategy sessions could never teach them, was how the plumbing actually worked. The Stardust data integration wasn't just a simple API stream. 3 years ago, to prevent competitor data scraping, I had hard-coded a rolling, dynamic authentication mechanism into the core engine. Every single night at 3 a.m., the system performed a secure cryptographic handshake with Stardust's backend. That handshake didn't use a corporate certificate. It was cryptographically bound to my specific, individual master developer key and active employee biometric signature. The moment my resignation cleared the automated HR system, my Active Directory permissions would be permanently purged. My developer key would be automatically flagged as terminated. And at 3 a.m., when the system went to pull the daily data stream from Stardust, the handshake would fail. The connection would drop. The entire Lumina Core backend would lock itself down into an irreversible security panic mode. I pulled up the corporate HR intranet. I scrolled down to the bottom of my profile page, hovering the cursor over the bright red button that read, "Confirm immediate resignation." A warning pop-up flashed onto the screen. Warning: this action is irreversible. Your corporate credentials, building access, code repository permissions, and email will be terminated within 15 minutes of confirmation. I looked across the room at Brooks, who was buried in a terminal, trying to salvage a broken build. I looked down the hall at Gavin's office, where he was laughing with a product manager, probably celebrating his $3 million win. I smirked, a cold, ruthless smile cutting across my face. Irreversible, I muttered to myself. That's exactly the point. I clicked the button. The screen of my iPhone went black, then lit up again with another incoming call. It was 8:15 a.m. on Monday. Over the last 48 hours, my phone had been vibrating so violently it had practically crawled its way across my kitchen counter. I didn't pick it up. I just took a sip of my black coffee, leaning against the counter, and watched the notifications stack up like a car crash on the I-35. 23 missed calls from Brooks. 14 from the Apex main switchboard. 3 from Gavin Vance. And, most satisfyingly, 2 from Victoria Sterling's private office. My laptop was open next to the coffee maker, logged into a public financial dashboard. The market had opened 15 minutes ago. Apex Technologies stock, Apex, was already down 12% in pre-market trading, and the line was currently nosediving into a straight vertical drop. The headline on Bloomberg's tech sector live feed read, Apex Technologies' flagship asset Lumina Core suffers complete network blackout, millions of users locked out. The digital clock on my microwave clicked to 8:30 a.m. Right on cue, Brooks' name flashed across my phone screen again. This time, I swiped to answer. Nate. Oh my God. Nate, you finally picked up. Brooks' voice exploded through the speaker. He sounded like he was running a marathon while breathing through a paper bag. Where the hell are you? I'm at home, Brooks. I'm a private citizen, I said, keeping my voice deadpan as I swirled the coffee in my mug. What's going on at the office? It's a bloodbath, man. A total freaking nuclear winter. Brooks was practically shouting over a background din of panicked voices and distant, ringing phones. The entire system went into defensive lock mode at exactly 3 a.m. on Saturday morning. The Stardust data stream dropped entirely. Gavin brought in some high-priced cybersecurity consultants from Deloitte at daylight, and those idiots tried to force override the encryption. It triggered the secondary defensive wipe. Right now, the whole database is a ghost town. I told Gavin the dynamic handshake was a safety line, I said calmly. He chose to cut it. He's losing his goddamn mind, Nate. His face isn't even white. It's practically translucent. Brooks laughed, a hysterical, panicked sound. Victoria Sterling arrived at the building an hour ago with a police escort and 2 members of the board. She's currently in the main server room screaming at Gavin so loud you can hear it through the ventilation shafts. They know it's your developer key that locked the gate. Victoria ordered HR to reactivate your credentials, but the system flagged your account as terminated by user request. It's locked out at the root level. They can't reactivate it from the inside, Brooks. The architecture doesn't allow an override on an ungraceful termination. I built it that way so an internal rogue agent couldn't hijack the database. Well, you built a masterpiece of a vault, because nobody can crack it, Brooks said, his voice dropping into a tense whisper. Gavin's running around telling everyone you committed corporate sabotage. They've already leaked a statement to TechCrunch saying a disgruntled former architect maliciously corrupted the core repository before fleeing the company. They're trying to pin the entire market drop on you, man. Let them talk, I said, narrowing my eyes at my laptop screen. A press release doesn't fix a broken API. How's the team holding up? We're doing exactly what you told us to do. We aren't touching a single line of code. We told Gavin we don't have the cryptographic clearance to rebuild the handshake template. He tried to threaten Zach with a termination for insubordination, and Zach just threw his badge on the table and went to lunch. Good. Keep your heads down and don't let them bully you into trying a manual patch. If you touch it, they'll blame you for the permanent data loss. Copy that. Oh, shit. Gavin just walked out of the elevator with 2 corporate lawyers. I gotta go. The line cut to static. I hung up, entirely unbothered by the threat of Gavin's legal team. I knew the law. I had followed the employee handbook to the exact letter. I gave immediate notice, submitted my exit paperwork through the automated system, and left all documentation in the public server. The system locking down wasn't sabotage. It was the automated consequence of their own security policy, which mandated the immediate revocation of terminated keys. They had executed the policy. The machine had simply obeyed. I clicked over to my personal email tab to check my inbox. There was a new message sitting at the top, sent at 7:45 a.m. from an address that made me sit up a little straighter, r.donovan@stardustdata.com. Rhett Donovan, the 32-year-old billionaire CEO of Stardust Data, and a guy who hated Gavin Vance even more than I did. I opened the email. It was short, punchy, and completely devoid of corporate fluff. Nate. Asterisk, I just looked at the generic template amendment Apex, tried to push through our portal on Friday. It's an absolute clown show. My engineers flagged it instantly. Then, at 3 a.m., your master handshake key went dark, and the Apex server went into a security panic. Asterisk. Asterisk, I don't know what kind of game Vance is playing over there, but I'm not letting an amateur compromise our data pipeline integrity. Our legal counsel just finalized a formal breach of contract notice against Apex Technologies. We are suing them for $100 million in damages and cross-contamination risk, effective immediately. Their data feed is permanently terminated until further notice. Asterisk. Asterisk, more importantly, I know talent when I see it, and you're the engine under that hood. Stardust is launching a next-gen decentralized analytics platform next month. I need a principal core architect, and I want you. Name your salary. Name your equity stake. Let's build something that makes Apex look like a local hardware store. Asterisk. Let me know when you're ready to talk. Rhett. I stared at the text, a slow, genuine smile spreading across my face. The pieces were moving exactly where they needed to be. Victoria and Gavin thought they were the only players on the board, But they had forgotten that in the tech world, the person who owns the architecture always owns the game. I pulled up a fresh reply draft, my fingers hovering over the keyboard. Rhett, asterisk, I appreciate the offer, and the answer is almost certainly yes. But before I step onto your board, I have a lingering debt to collect from Apex. Give me 48 hours to finish the cleanup over here. Asterisk. Asterisk, and do me a favor. Hold off on filing that lawsuit with the court until 2 o'clock this afternoon. Let the threat marinate in Victoria's inbox for a few hours. Asterisk. Let's talk on Wednesday. Nate. I hit send. I closed my laptop, walked over to my living room window, and looked down at the street below. A sleek, black Cadillac Escalade with tinted windows had just pulled up to the curb outside my apartment building. The doors opened, and two people stepped out onto the pavement. Gavin Vance, looking completely disheveled in a wrinkled suit, and Victoria Sterling, her expression sharp enough to cut glass. I checked my watch. 8:45 a.m. They were ahead of schedule. I took one last, long sip of my coffee and walked toward the front door to wait for the buzzer. The heavy metal knocker on my apartment door didn't just rattle. It practically threatened to splinter the oak frame. I didn't rush. I set my empty mug on the kitchen island, took a slow breath to lock in my focus, and walked over. I swung the door open, keeping the security chain latched. Gavin Vance looked like he had spent the last 48 hours sleeping inside a running clothes dryer. His tie was crooked, his hair was a desperate mess, and his eyes were bloodshot. Standing next to him, Victoria Sterling looked like an absolute assassin in a sharp Chanel power suit, though the tight crease between her eyebrows betrayed the absolute chaos tearing her company apart. Nate, open the damn door, Gavin barked, stepping forward and jamming his hand against the frame. We don't have time for games. You need to get your ass to the office right now. The entire backend is fried, and you're the only one who can override the encryption protocol. I leaned against the doorpost, looking through the gap with a cold, slow smile. Good morning to you too, Gavin. But I think you're confused. I don't work for Apex Technologies anymore. I'm just a private citizen enjoying a Monday off. Listen to me, you arrogant little shit, Gavin hissed, his voice cracking under the weight of his panic. We know what you did. You intentionally injected a malicious logical bomb into the system before you submitted that fake resignation. That's corporate sabotage. It's a federal crime. There are two corporate lawyers down in the lobby right now, and if you don't unlock that server in the next 10 minutes, I will personally have the FBI bust through this door and throw your ass in a federal penitentiary. Go ahead and call them, Gavin, I said, my voice dropping into a razor-sharp whisper that cut right through his bluster. I followed the standard employee handbook to the letter. I submitted my resignation through the HR portal. I returned my equipment to IT. The system automatically revoked my Active Directory permissions, which natively killed my master developer key. That's not sabotage. That's your company policy. You executed the automated offboarding sequence without understanding how the infrastructure worked, and now you're looking at the consequences of your own staggering incompetence. Shut up, Gavin, Victoria finally snapped, her voice cutting through the hall like a whip. She stepped in front of him, shoving him back with an elbow, and looked directly into my eyes through the cracked door. Her usual regal, unbothered corporate demeanor was gone. She looked tired, furious, but entirely pragmatic. Nathaniel, Victoria said, forcing her voice into a measured, negotiating tone. Let's stop the theater. We are losing $30 million in market cap every single hour this blackout continues. Stardust Data just hit our legal department with a formal intent to sue for breach of contract, and they've cut our live stream permanently. The board is in a full-blown panic. I admit, Gavin made an aggressive operational call that didn't account for the cryptographic architecture. We can review his management choices later. But right now, we need a fix. I told you on Thursday night what the risk was, Victoria, I said, refusing to soften my stare. You told me you didn't pay line-level employees to challenge your leadership hires. You told me to use the standard portal if I had an issue. Well, I used the portal. I clicked Confirm Resignation. Victoria's jaw tightened, a sharp muscle twitching under her flawless skin. I understand you're angry. You felt undervalued. Fine. Let's look at this as a pure business transaction. I will authorize an immediate $1 million cash signing bonus to bring you back as Chief Technology Officer. We will rip up Gavin's cost reduction contract and restore your original security baseline. 1 million, Nathaniel. It goes into your account the second the Lumina Core dashboard turns green. That is an incredibly generous offer to settle a personal grievance. You still don't get it, do you? I chuckled, the sound cold and hollow in the quiet hallway. You think this is just about money? You think you can stomp on an engineer's dignity for 5 years, treat his life's work like a disposable asset, and then throw a check at him when your house catches fire? My dignity isn't for sale, Victoria. And your $1 million is an absolute joke compared to the crater you're sitting on. Then name your price, she demanded, her voice dropping all pretense of warmth. What does it take to get you back in that server room? I unlatched the security chain and swung the door wide open, stepping onto the threshold. I stood tall, looking down at both of them. I have 3 non-negotiable terms, I said, holding up 3 fingers. First, Apex Technologies will issue a formal, company-wide public press release on all investor channels, stating that the system outage was caused entirely by executive management's gross strategic errors and explicitly clearing my name of any wrongdoing. And you, Victoria, along with Gavin, will sign it with your actual pens. You're out of your mind, Gavin yelled. That's career suicide. Second, I continued, ignoring his screeching entirely. Gavin is terminated immediately, effective today. The press release will state he was fired for gross incompetence and a severe breach of fiduciary duty, ensuring he never touches a piece of enterprise software again for the rest of his miserable life. Gavin's face went from pale to a deep, toxic purple. Victoria, don't listen to this psychopath. Third, I said, stepping right into Victoria's personal space. The emotional and professional damage you put my team through over the last 3 months carries a heavy premium. My cash consulting fee to restore the system is $20 million, paid up front into a Swiss escrow account. And finally, I want 5% of Apex Technologies. Not options, not vests. Pure, unrestricted voting common stock, finalized by corporate counsel before I even type a single character into the terminal. 5%. Gavin screamed, his voice hitting a glass-shattering octave. That's hundreds of millions of dollars. You're robbing the company. I am the only person on this planet who can reconnect the Stardust stream and save your billion-dollar empire from a total corporate liquidation, I said, my voice dead, flat, and absolute. I own the keys. I own the code. I own your entire infrastructure. So yes, Gavin, that is the price of admission. I turned my gaze back to Victoria, who looked like she had just been forced to swallow broken glass. I'm going back inside to finish my breakfast, I told her, checking my watch. It is currently 8:52 a.m. I am giving you exactly 10 minutes to have corporate legal draft the equity transfer and the termination papers. At 9:02 a.m., if those documents aren't signed and sitting in my inbox, the price doubles. And at noon, I take a consulting call with Stardust Data to help them finalize their liquidation lawsuit against you. Clock's ticking, Victoria. I stepped back and slammed the door shut, letting the deadbolt click into place with a heavy, definitive sound. The glass doors of Apex Technologies didn't feel like a gateway to a tech empire anymore. They felt like the entrance to a funeral home. At exactly 5:45 p.m., the public press release had crossed the wire. It was a bloodbath in text, Victoria's signed confession of executive failure and Gavin's career obituary, blasted to every investor from Austin to Wall Street. When I walked onto the third-floor tech deck, the silence was deafening. The long rows of monitors were flashing with red error logs. Dozens of engineers sat paralyzed, but the moment I stepped past the elevators, Brooks and Zach stood up. Within seconds, the entire floor was on their feet, watching me walk toward the main terminal cage. Victoria Sterling was already standing inside the server enclosure, flanked by 3 corporate attorneys whose expensive briefcases looked entirely useless against a dead database. Gavin was nowhere to be seen. His desk had already been cleared into a single cardboard box sitting by the trash chute. The escrow wire cleared 10 minutes ago, Nathaniel. Your 5% common stock allocation is locked into the registry, Victoria said, her voice sounding entirely scraped out, like a woman who had spent the last 9 hours screaming at board members. She shoved a high-security corporate tablet toward me. The lawyers have verified the signatures. Now patch the damn leak. I didn't answer her. I didn't even look at the tablet. I sat down at the Master Architect terminal, pulled a thin silver chain from beneath my collar, and unclipped the military-grade encrypted flash drive. Brooks, bring up the Stardust Data Bridge listener on port 443, I ordered, my fingers hitting the mechanical keyboard with a sharp, rapid-fire rhythm. Already on it, Nate, Brooks said, his voice buzzing with adrenaline as he booted up his terminal from across the room. The Stardust API gateway is sitting in a holding pattern. They're waiting on our signal. They're waiting on the key, I said. I slammed the flash drive into the terminal's physical USB slot. The command line interface blinked once, twice, and then a bright neon prompt flashed across the dark screen. Welcome home, Master Cole. I executed the master override script, typing out a 64-character alphanumeric cryptographic passkey from memory. Zach, tell the IT infrastructure team to stand down. If anyone tries to run a manual diagnostic while I'm syncing the tables, the security perimeter will permanently wipe the session keys. Done, Zach yelled back, his hands flying across his keyboard. IT is completely hands-off. The board is clear. I hit the enter key. For 3 agonizing seconds, the screen went pitch black. Then, a massive vertical waterfall of green data logs started cascading down the display. Millions of strings, secure API handshakes, and user verification tokens validating in real time. A giant green box popped up in the center of the screen. Asterisk Lumina Core System Status. Online. Stardust Data Stream. Active. Asterisk. We're back up. Brooks screamed, throwing his hands in the air. The active user dashboard just spiked to 42 million. The data latency is down to 0. We are completely green, baby. The tech floor erupted into absolute chaos behind the glass. Programmers were cheering, slamming the desks, and high-fiving. I let out a slow, steady breath, leaning back in the ergonomic chair as the server fans settled into their familiar, rhythmic hum. Victoria didn't cheer. She stared at the green dashboard, her face hard as stone, before turning her icy glare directly onto me. You got your money, Nathaniel. You got your pound of flesh. Now get back to work and optimize the next quarter's projections. You're misreading the room, Victoria, I said, standing up from the terminal and adjusting the sleeves of my jacket. I'm not your employee anymore. I'm the second largest individual shareholder in this company. And as of 5 minutes ago, I officially called an emergency meeting of the board of directors. Victoria's eyes narrowed into slits. You don't have the leverage to call a proxy vote. I do when I have the backing of the 3 primary venture capital funds on the board, who just watched you erase 30% of their portfolio value over a personal ego trip, I said, leaning over the console, my voice entirely devoid of warmth. I've already filed the formal motion for your immediate removal as chairwoman, citing a severe breach of fiduciary duty and malicious mismanagement of core technical assets. You wouldn't dare, she whispered, her hands tightening into white-knuckled fists. My husband founded this company, and your husband is about to watch you answer for what you did to it, I shot back. The heavy doors at the end of the deck swung open, and Julian Sterling walked out. The CEO looked completely hollow, his face gray from the transatlantic flight, his tie undone as he marched toward the server cage. He looked at the green monitors, then at his wife, and finally at me. Nate, Julian said, his voice cracking with a mix of exhaustion and absolute desperation. I just read the press release from the plane. I know Victoria went too far with Gavin. I know she didn't listen. But for God's sake, man, look at what we built here. Look at the history we have. Can we please take this behind closed doors? Don't do this to her. Don't do this to the family. Where were you on Thursday, Julian? I asked, my voice flat, refusing to let his desperation move me. Where were you when Gavin was gutting our security? Where were you when your wife told me I was a replaceable, line-level nobody? I was running the European front. You were hiding, I interrupted brutally. You let her run this place like a tech-flavored dictatorship because you were too terrified of conflict to protect the people who actually write the code. You're a brilliant engineer, Julian, but you're a coward of a CEO. I reached into my pocket, pulled out a stark white envelope, and slapped it onto the glass table right in front of him. That's your official resignation draft, Julian. Sign it, step down gracefully, and take your wife out of this building before the board leaks the rest of her asset allocation files to the SEC. Julian looked down at the envelope like it was a live grenade. He looked at Victoria, whose silence was an absolute admission of defeat. With a trembling hand, he reached into his pocket, pulled out his Montblanc pen, and signed the line. He didn't say a word. He just took his wife by the arm and led her toward the service elevators, their heads down, completely crushed by the machine they thought they owned. I watched the elevator doors slide shut, cutting off the last remnants of the old guard. My phone buzzed in my hand. It was a text from Rhett Donovan. Asterisk just saw the board alert. The Stardust board has officially approved the joint venture architecture. Welcome to the top, Nate. Let's run this town. Asterisk. I slid the phone back into my pocket and turned around to face the tech deck. Brooks, Zach, and 50 other developers were staring through the glass, waiting for their new orders. Brooks, I called out, my voice echoing clearly across the floor. Clear the JIRA queue. Delete every single tracking report Gavin made you write this week. From now on, we don't build metrics. We build software. The roar of approval that went up from the floor was loud enough to vibrate the glass. I smiled, walking back to the master terminal. The architecture was clean, the power was absolute, and the new era of Apex Technologies had just officially begun.